You share 60% of your DNA with a banana, 98.8% with a chimpanzee. Everyone nods along. Yes, DNA shows common ancestry. But what is this thing you're sharing? What does 60% the same even mean? The same what exactly? Why would you and a banana need any of the same instructions at all? People say DNA is the blueprint of life, but that's just a metaphor. It doesn't tell you what it's a blueprint for or why blueprints would overlap between kingdoms separated by a billion years of evolution. The answer reveals something stranger than mere similarity. It exposes what life actually is at the deepest level. The reason you share DNA with a banana has nothing to do with ancestry alone. It's about what being alive means. Everyone says DNA is a blueprint or an instruction manual. But instructions for what exactly? If I said, follow these instructions, TAGCCATGG, what are you building? You can't tell. The metaphor hides the actual question. It makes us feel like we understand something when really we've just attached a familiar word to a mystery. Let's start with what DNA actually is. Chemically, physically. DNA is a long-chain molecule made of 4 types of chemical units: adenine, thymine, guanine, cytosine. We call them A, T, G, and C. That's it. Just a sequence, like beads on a string. Each gene is a stretch of this sequence, maybe 1,000 to 2,000 letters long. You have about 20,000 genes spread across 46 chromosomes in nearly every cell of your body. But here's what should strike you. These letters don't do anything by themselves. They're not little machines. They don't move. They don't build. They don't react with other chemicals to make things happen. They're just information, a code. Like Morse code doesn't make sound. It just represents instructions that someone else has to carry out. The DNA sits there, a passive archive. Code for what, though? Each gene contains the instructions to build one specific protein. That's the key. Proteins are where the action happens. Proteins are the machines. They digest your food, they copy your DNA, they move your muscles, they fight infections, they build cell walls, they ferry oxygen through your blood. Every chemical reaction in your body, and I mean every single one, requires a protein to make it happen. The DNA sits in the nucleus of your cell, sends a message out into the surrounding fluid. The cell machinery reads that message and assembles amino acids in a specific order. That order determines the protein's shape. The shape determines what the protein does. One gene equals one recipe for one protein, right? So, DNA codes for proteins. But here's what Darwin couldn't have known. What transforms this from clever chemistry into something profound. You and a banana both need to extract energy from sugar. You both need to build cell walls. You both need to copy DNA without errors. You both need to repair damage. You both need to respond to your environment. Wait, those functions require proteins, specific proteins. And to make those specific proteins, you need specific genes. Same job equals same protein needed equals same gene, or at least a very similar gene. The 60% match with a banana. Those are genes for basic cellular machinery. Breathing, cellular respiration, I mean. Eating, metabolizing glucose. Growing, dividing, repairing. Even a banana cell has to do those things. The 40% difference? That's building banana-specific structures versus human-specific structures. Roots and leaves versus brains and livers. But the core engine of being a living cell? Nearly identical. Well, not identical. The sequences vary slightly. Evolution tinkers with them over time. But they code for proteins that do the same job. Different species, same function, and when you compare the genes, you can recognize them as versions of each other. This should genuinely blow your mind. Being alive requires a specific toolkit, not just any random collection of molecules, specific machinery, and you and a banana are both using it, which raises the question Darwin spent his entire life working on. Why the same toolkit? There are two possibilities. Either life invented these tools separately in bananas and humans, converged independently on the same solutions, or life invented them once, and then everything inherited them. Darwin's insight was that there's overwhelming evidence for the second option. Look at the DNA sequences themselves. Not just both organisms have a gene for producing energy. Look at the actual letters, letter by letter comparison. Take the gene for cytochrome C. It's a protein involved in energy production, absolutely essential. The human version is 104 amino acids long. The chimpanzee version differs by 0 amino acids, exactly the same. The chicken version differs by 13 amino acids, still very similar. The yeast version, yeast, a single-celled fungus, differs by 44 amino acids. More different, but still recognizably the same gene doing the same job. Do you see the pattern? Gradual change over time from a common ancestor. If these were separate inventions, if chickens invented their own cytochrome C and humans invented theirs, why would chicken be more similar to human than yeast is? Why would there be this perfect nested hierarchy of similarity? The genes themselves bear the marks of descent with modification. Darwin never saw DNA. He died in 1882, decades before we knew it existed. But in 1859, when he published Origin of Species, he made a prediction. All living things, he said, descended from a common ancestor. He based this on anatomy, on embryos, on geographic distribution, on fossils. And he predicted that if you could somehow see the hereditary material, whatever that turned out to be, you would find the tree of life written in it. The pattern of common descent would be unmistakable. 1953. Watson and Crick discover the structure of DNA. 1960s and 70s. Scientists start sequencing genes. And there it is. Tree of life, exactly as predicted. Species that look similar have DNA that's more similar. Species that separated longer ago have DNA that's more different. But not random differences. There's a specific pattern of nested similarity that could only arise from branching descent. Let me prove it to you. Take the cytochrome C gene. Sequence it in 100 different species. Plot the differences. Count how many amino acids differ between each pair of species. Use those numbers to construct a family tree showing which species are most closely related. You know what you get? The exact same family tree that morphologists built from anatomy alone. Independent confirmation. The molecular data and the anatomical data agree perfectly. The genes don't just match, they match in a pattern that only makes sense if they're modified copies passed down through generations. Think of it like this. Mutations accumulate over time, like spelling errors in hand-copied manuscripts. The more times a manuscript gets copied, the more errors accumulate. If you have two manuscripts with similar errors, they probably came from the same source. If one manuscript has many more errors than another, it's been copied more times. It's further removed from the original. That's what we see in DNA. More generations between two species equals more accumulated differences. Recent common ancestor equals fewer differences. It's like linguistic drift. Spanish and Italian are more similar to each other than Spanish and English are, because Spanish and Italian split from Latin more recently. They haven't had as much time to diverge. The pattern in DNA is identical, but here's what makes this truly profound. DNA doesn't just show you're related to a banana. It shows you and the banana are running on the same operating system. With modifications, of course. The banana added banana-specific applications. You added human-specific applications. But the kernel? The core operating system? Ancient. Shared. Your cells are powered by structures called mitochondria. They're often called the powerhouses of the cell, which is accurate. They generate the energy currency your cells run on. But mitochondria are strange. They have their own DNA, separate from the DNA in your nucleus. Bacterial DNA. Because about 2 billion years ago, one cell swallowed another cell, failed to digest it, and the two formed a partnership. The engulfed cell became the mitochondrion. We can prove this. Mitochondrial DNA is more similar to bacterial DNA than it is to your nuclear DNA. More precisely, mitochondria descended from bacteria. They've changed over 2 billion years of coevolution with their host cells. But the signature is unmistakable. You are literally a colony, a community of organisms that merged so long ago they function as one. Ancient merged organisms running your energy production at this very moment, which brings us to the deepest part of this. Darwin's great insight wasn't just that species change, that was already suspected. His insight was that life's diversity comes from modification of shared heritage, not separate creations, not independent origins, one process branching over time. DNA is the record of that process. Every gene you have is an edited copy of an ancestral gene. Some version of that gene existed in your parents, their parents, back through primates, back through mammals, back through vertebrates, back through multicellular life, back to single cells, back to the very first self-replicating molecules 4 billion years ago. Your genome is an archive of 4 billion years. Some genes are ancient, shared with bacteria because they date back to the origin of cellular life. Some are newer, shared with vertebrates only because they arose after we split from invertebrates. Some are brand new, human-specific, evolved within the last few million years. They're layered like geological strata. You can read evolutionary history in your genome just like you can read Earth's history in rock layers. The so-called junk DNA between genes? Much of it is dead viral DNA from ancient infections. Viruses that inserted themselves into germ cells of your ancestors and got passed down, generation after generation. They're fossils, molecular fossils. You also have pseudogenes, broken genes that no longer work. They're like wisdom teeth or your appendix, but in DNA form. Remnants of genes that were useful to your ancestors but became unnecessary and degraded over time. Your genome is a palimpsest, a manuscript where old text has been erased and written over. But if you look carefully, you can still see earlier layers showing through. The comparison with the banana isn't just we're related, it's we're both using edited versions of the same ancient instruction manual, the manual for how to be a cell, how to harvest energy, how to copy yourself, how to maintain organization in a universe that tends toward chaos. And here's why that's not just history, it's how life works right now. Return to the opening question. What does 60% similarity mean? Now you know. It means 60% of your genes code for proteins that do jobs banana cells also need done. The other 40%? Those are banana-specific solutions and human-specific solutions to banana-specific and human-specific problems. But the overlap isn't coincidence, it's functional necessity. There's a minimum toolkit required to be a cell. You must store information, that's DNA. You must read it, that's RNA. You must execute the instructions, that's proteins. You must generate energy, that's metabolism. You must maintain boundaries, that's the cell membrane. You must reproduce, that's cell division. These aren't optional. Without them, you're not alive. You're just chemistry that doesn't perpetuate itself. Those functions require specific molecular machines. Those machines are proteins. The genes for those proteins are conserved across all life because you can't just invent a totally different way to copy DNA. Too many other things depend on it working exactly right. The machinery is interdependent. Change one piece and 10 other pieces break. So the core machinery gets locked in early in evolutionary history. Then evolution tinkers around the edges, adds new features, modifies existing ones, creates new proteins for new functions, but rarely replaces the engine entirely. Sometimes it does, but those lineages usually die out. What we see surviving today are the lineages that kept core systems stable while innovating in other areas. The unity we see in DNA isn't just historical. We all came from the same ancestor. It's functional. Being alive requires these specific things, and we're all doing them. DNA reveals that requirement by showing us which instructions all life needs. The overlap is the job description for being alive. Darwin wrote in one of his notebooks, "There is grandeur in this view of life." He meant, all life is one family, not separate kinds that happen to look similar. Variations on a theme. The theme is self-replicating chemistry. You and a banana are both solving the same fundamental problem: how to maintain order in a universe that tends toward disorder. How to copy yourself with enough accuracy that your descendants resemble you. How to extract energy from your environment without destroying yourself. How to respond to change without losing your identity. The solutions? Remarkably similar across all life, because they work, and they've been tested and refined over 4 billion years. We're not just related to other life. We're part of one continuous experiment in self-organization that's been running since the planet cooled. Which raises something Darwin couldn't have asked. If all life runs on DNA, if all life uses the same genetic code, A, T, G, C, translating into the same 20 amino acids in bacteria and in humans, why that code? Why those 4 chemical letters and not others? Why those 20 amino acids and not different ones? Is it a frozen accident from early history? The first system that worked, and now we're stuck with it because everything depends on it? Or is there something special about this particular chemistry? Could life use a completely different system? Different letters, different code? We don't know. Finding alien life would tell us. If their DNA also uses A, T, G, C, maybe there's only one way to do this. If it's completely different, maybe ours is accident. That's a different question. I've got to stop somewhere. But think about that. 4 billion years, all of this complexity, all of this diversity, and it might all run on chemistry that just happened to work first.